So, alrighty, let's do it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Stop Leaving Money on the Table, How to Communicate Your Impact to Secure Grants with Sheri Chaney Jones. This spotlight is being recorded and the slides will be shared afterwards, so keep your eyes peeled for a follow-up email later in case you want to review anything from today. If you have any questions throughout, we ask that you put 3 pound signs in front of your question when you're popping it in the chat, just to ensure that it stands out and that we don't miss it. If your question isn't answered during the presentation, do not worry. We're going to be keeping track of questions asked throughout on our end, and we'll try our best to address it during the live Q&A at the end of the presentation. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Deanna, and I'm the Partnerships Marketing Manager at Instrumentl, and I'm going to be your host for today. In case it's your first time here, this is a free grant workshop, and it's a partner Instrumentl webinar. These are collaborations between Instrumentl and our community partners to provide free educational workshops for grant professionals. Our goal in these workshops is very much in line with our overall goal here at Instrumentl, and that is to support grant writers and nonprofits in order to get the best tools, insights, and expertise that they need to win more funding with ultimately less work. And we do that by bringing grant prospecting, tracking, and management to one central place. And so I'm going to take a couple minutes to explain what exactly that means before I officially pass it over to Sheri and we hop into this really exciting topic about communicating your impact. So to start, I would love just for everyone to know, like, Instrumentl loves efficiency. I would actually say that we're probably like a pretty efficiency obsessed team. It's probably safe to say that. And I think that this is an area that we're always constantly trying to improve on. And so Instrumentl at a high level, we're saving people time, on average 3 hours every week on their grants process. And we're increasing grant output pretty substantially within the first year of people using us by 78%. So you might be wondering, how do we do that? I'm going to go over just a couple slides, 4 slides, to give you an idea of what that exactly looks like. So like I said before, Instrumentl is a prospecting, tracking, and management platform for all things grants. That means that everything you're doing when it comes to grants essentially sits under one little umbrella, and it's all in the same place. We have over 12,000 active grants on our platform. So that means that if you see an opportunity on Instrumentl, it's available to actually be applied for. You don't have to find the perfect opportunity and then find out you can't actually apply for it. We only put active opportunities on our platform. We're also going to be sending you weekly updates on deadlines and new opportunities, kind of like a personal assistant would do, that sits in the background and just works for you 24/7. And of course, let's say that you find the perfect good fit opportunities for your organization, then the prioritization and the evaluation process becomes the next big hurdle to overcome in this process, right? And it can be a pretty substantial time suck. So what we do for the people who rely on, digging through 990s to get in a better idea of who the funder is, we're instead using some visualization tools to just simplify all that information for you. So for example, what you're looking at here are a couple examples of this. On the top left, we're showing you the average and median giving for this specific funder. So quickly, I can see that they're giving this amount each year. And on the next one to the right, you can see information on the geographic focus of this funder. And we can dig in deeper specifically to like what those organizations in those geographic locations are that the funder is giving money to consistently. You can see here the Athletic Scholars Advancement Program is one example of this. And then on the very bottom in the right, you're also looking at some information on competition. So how is this organization prioritizing new grantees versus past grantees? And just a fun little pro tip here, anything over 30% new grantees is a go, and anything under, it's probably going to be a lot more competitive compared to anything over. So in this example, you can see there's 65% of awards have gone to new grantees. That is like a huge green light for organizations that are seeking first-time funding from this funder. So essentially, all to say, what we're doing here is we're just taking all of the information, multi-year data that you might find in 990s and that you might spend a lot of time digging for, and we're visualizing it for you so you can see it in the easiest way possible. All right. And then, of course, Once you decide an opportunity is actually worth pursuing, it's a good fit, there's the need to, communicate all of this information within your team and just make sure everyone is on the same page so that you're able to collaborate efficiently. So assigning tasks quickly and making sure that your team has all the information they need in terms of like notes and all the documents that they potentially need is very, very important. So whether that's docs containing research notes, like you see here on the very bottom, templates, impact studies, or performance indicators, all of that information is going to be right here for you on Instrumentl. And this top image is actually very exciting because it's one of our new features, which is the task view feature. And it allows you to view all of your tasks and their associated deadlines and types and what opportunity they're linked to in a very seamless and easy way. And bear with me, one more slide. And finally, of course, whether you're in the application phase or once you get to like that post-award grant phase, you really want to make sure that you're tracking all of those deadlines and quickly able to see what's coming up and what's on the calendar. And so we're also going to help you stay organized, whether that's through like a traditional tracker, like you see here in the background, where you're just listing everything that's going on in the status, or a calendar view, like the top picture. Or if it's a reporting tool, like you can see here with the little orange arrow at the top, that allows you to really quickly take and download PDFs or CSV files that you can share with your board or at agenda meetings, just to keep everyone on the same loop, whether they're on your team or a stakeholder for your organization. So that is essentially my spiel. I will say one thing to note, we did launch a couple really awesome new features like this task view recently, and we've been giving away 14 days of a free trial for anyone who wants to try out those features. So if you've been thinking about it, you want to see what Instrumentl is for yourself, I'm going to pop the link to create a free 14-day trial of Instrumentl in the chat, so you have the opportunity to do so today. And on the other hand, let's say that you're interested in grants, but maybe you're not quite ready for a tool like Instrumentl. That's totally okay. Stick around with us to the end because we're also going to be giving away a couple of really awesome freebies. The first is a really great one from Sheri, and the second is our 40-page guide that I'll tell you more about here in the end. So if you're not ready for a tool, there is still something here for you today. So definitely stay with us throughout this presentation to get access to those. And with that, I'm going to stop screen sharing. Sheri, if you want to start sharing your screen, I'm super excited to be hearing about communicating impact from Sheri Chaney Jones today. Do an official introduction and officially pass it over to you so I can stop talking. So Sheri Chaney Jones, we're so lucky to have her here with us today. She's an author, a professor, and internationally recognized expert who believes in data, metrics, and accountability. She has more than 20 years of experience applying performance management, evaluation, and organization behavior best practices to nonprofit organizations and government agencies to improve outcomes and efficiencies. Sheri's foray into entrepreneurship began with Measurement Resource Company in 2010. And in 2018, Sheri launched Sure Impact to automate and simplify the process of collecting and sharing outcomes and impact data. Thank you so much for joining us today, Sheri. And with that, Sheri, please take it away. Please add anything about yourself that I might have missed or that you would like to add. And with that, welcome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. Well, hello, everyone. I am so honored and grateful to be with you all today. Thank you to Instrumentl and Deanna for the invitation to talk about how are you going to use Instrumentl to find all the great grant opportunities, but we also need to make sure we're communicating our impact so that we will win those grant opportunities. And that's what we'll be talking about today. But first, I'm curious to know a little bit more about those of you who are on the call, because we have seen a significant shift in the amount of funders who are asking for outcomes data, impact data. Really, can you prove the impact and value that your nonprofit creates? So I think we have a poll, Deanna, that we'll be launching. And I'm curious to know how much you agree that your organization has missed out on funding opportunities in the last 6 months to a year or so because you couldn't demonstrate your outcomes. Just get a sense of where you think you may fall on this. So how much do you agree that you have potentially missed out on opportunities because of your ability to demonstrate and communicate outcomes. And while we're waiting for the responses to come in, we'll so please feel free to answer that question. But what we need to really understand is that grants are grantors, I guess, are our partners, and they are in the nonprofit space. And so first we need to get ourselves in the mindset of a funder. And they do, just like you, seek to provide help for individuals, families, and communities that thrive. Where you have the expertise and value. Oh, thank you. We've got the results back, Diana. All right. Well, it looks like you're all in the right place because we have approximately 50%, or if you add in the neither agree nor disagree category, about 75% of you feel like you may be missing opportunities because your lack of ability to demonstrate outcomes. So even those of us on this call know how important it is to be able to communicate that. And so we'll talk exactly how to do this in a way that inspires, encourages, and motivates you to be the winning grant application. So we're all in the right place today because that's where we're going. And so when we're thinking about our funders, right, they think of us as nonprofits as I love this phrase, portals of purpose, right? So they exist to distribute funds to see real and lasting community change. And you are the individuals on the ground doing the work that are their portals of purpose. They have the funding, you have the services and operations to do that. And so although there is alignment in terms of your desire to see communities and families thrive, their desires to fund programs that see communities and families thrive, sometimes there's this intentional disconnect between a funder and the grantees and the direct service providers on the ground. And what just happened there? Oh, there we go. And there's this disconnect. And so we need to make sure that we are communicating in a way that is inspiring the grant makers to award us those grants, that we are the winning application. So what we have found through our research, and so as Deanna mentioned, I have been all aspects of the nonprofit sector. I have been a government funder. I have been a program evaluator for many, many years. I have been running nonprofits and government entities looking for grants. And so I know kind of all sides of what we need to do, what funders are looking for, and as well as what nonprofits need to do in order to tell that compelling story. And in 2014, I released my first book, Impact and Excellence, where I studied the nonprofit ecosystem and really looked at who was using data, what results were they getting because of that information. And what we found is that nonprofits who had outcomes and impact data and were using it in their grant applications and tell their story were significantly more likely to raise more money, to the tune of 68% more likely to raise more money than those who did not have outcomes and impact data. They also are able to serve more clients. They have better, more efficient and effective organizations, and they have better relationships with their stakeholders compared to those organizations who do not have outcomes and impact data and are using it as part of their communication strategy. So this is one of those, we would like to think of it as a hidden success factor that most nonprofit boards are talking about. They want to raise more money. They want more efficient and effective operations. They want better relationships with their funders. But maybe the secret ingredient is one that they're not talking about. And that is, do we have the right data and information to share with our funders? Because yes, we can build relationships by, having conversations and sitting down and having coffee and meeting people and building those personal relationships. But what our data has shown is that if relationships alone are how you're building with funders, and you add outcomes and impact data on top of that, that your kind of win rate, if you will, goes from approximately 50% to 80% of the time. And so this is something that nonprofits really need to be considering if they're not attracting the grants and enough funding that they want. And so how do we use data to build those long-term relationships with our funders? Well, it's that your funder understands that you are regularly and ongoing using data to better tell your story, and not just to tell your story, because I've talked to enough grant writers and development directors who say that it truly is a story that they're using when writing grants. But when you have outcomes and impact data, it's not just a story that you're sharing, it's actually reality that you're sharing. You are talking about how your nonprofit is changing lives and changing circumstances, and how when that funder invests in your particular nonprofit, that they are now that portal of purpose, right? Now they are along the journey with you. They understand their social return on investment. So we'll talk about how do you communicate that to social return on investment? How do you calculate that to build these mutually beneficial relationships? And at the end, I have some really powerful case studies of nonprofits who have seen wild success because they started to collect and track their outcomes data. So the first and foremost thing we want to make sure, when you're using Instrumentl and you find those grant opportunities that excite you, you definitely want to make sure that you have alignment with mission. If you are writing for a grant that is where your two missions are aligned, then you will not win that grant. And it's a waste of your time and effort and energy to even put forth that grant application. One of SureImpact customers is a national foundation, and they work specifically with direct service providers who are improving housing and family stability. And I had a friend in town who learned that we were working with them, and she's an executive director of a nonprofit. And she said, I apply for every single year for their funding, and I have never won a grant. How do you get a grant from that organization? And I looked at her and I was a little confused. I didn't understand why her organization would have even been applying. And I said, well, that funder is extremely data driven. They actually require their grantees to use SureImpact to track how they are improving housing stability and education stability and income stability for those that they serve. And I said, as far as I understand, your nonprofit does not track that. You don't do anything related to housing stability. You may be involved in children's education outcomes, but you don't have anything related to housing stability through your work. And so that is why you would not be receiving any of their funds. And she's like, oh, I understand now. So you want to make sure before you even invest in writing a grant that your goals align with their goals, because if they don't align, then there's probably no reason to even communicate your story to them, because you have a misalignment. So that's the very first thing, is making sure that your goals align with your funder's goals. So when you use your data to tell your story, they get excited about wanting to partner with you because you are going to help them accomplish their goals. All right, so how are we going to put all of this together and tell a very powerful story? Is first and foremost, we need to think about the end in mind. And so when I say think about the end in mind, what will the community look like when your organization is 100% successful? I like to, when you think about what should we be tracking, what should we be measuring? Well, you want to start there and think about those mission statements you have on the wall. What will the world look like when you are 100% successful? What you put and I know nonprofits don't like this expression, but it's true, right? If you solved the community's problem that you are here to solve, and everyone had, stable income, or everyone had improved health, or everyone now had a level of wellness or mindfulness, or the environment was well cared for and taken care of. You all have different mission statements, but what would the world look like if you were 100% successful? That is a little insight into what you should be measuring. Whatever those changes, those results that you would see in your community, in the individuals you serve, in the environment, actions, activities, behaviors, thoughts that would change because of your work, that is what you want to start to measure and communicate to your funders, not just how many people you serve. So a great exercise to help you do this is our 5 whys exercise. And this is a great exercise to do with your board, with your staff, with your team, and sit down and ask these 3 questions. Well, it's 5 questions each, but these 3 broader questions. Why do you do what you do? And ask yourself that 5 times. For example, if you say, we provide training services to underprivileged youth. Great. Why do you do that? We do that so we can increase their knowledge that they're not getting at home. Good. Why is it important that we increase their knowledge? Well, it's important we increase their knowledge so that they can have a better job in the future. Why is it important that they have a better job in the future? Because it increases their economic stability and quality of life. So that's just an example of how to do the 5 whys exercise. Then you're going to do the same thing for why do your funders and partners want to partner with you? And then why do your participants want to participate in your program, and what do they hope to accomplish? And why it is important that we do these 3 questions is because sometimes your funders and partners actually have different motivations than you do, and your partners and participants have different motivations than you do. But it's really important that you understand all of those motivations and that you measure outcomes related to those 3 buckets. So making sure you're achieving your mission. A lot of times, especially if it's a public funder, government funder, they're really interested in partnering with organizations who can demonstrate a reduction in public services. And so there's a financial component they want to see as part of your story. And then participants want to understand that their personal needs are going to be met. So you want to make sure that you can communicate and measure that as well, because if you can attract people who need your services to your nonprofit, guess what? You can't change their lives and change their circumstances. So we need all 3 of these data points to be measuring them and regularly using them as part of our ongoing management practices. So once we do our 5 whys, the next thing we want to do is turn those into outcomes, turn those into a logic model. So a logic model is a 1 piece of paper. It's essentially your theory of change that will communicate to a funder what makes you unique. What resources do you have? What are those inputs that your organization has? What makes your organization different than any other nonprofit that may be applying for that particular grant opportunity? So you want to make sure that there is a very logical line, if you will, between the inputs that your nonprofit has, the activities that you do, which just is the count. You often will see the word outputs in a grant application. Outputs are just a count of activities. So you want to make sure that there's a logical linkage between the inputs that you have, the activities, the outputs that you do, and then you're communicating to them, who do you serve specifically? Is there specific genders, socioeconomic status, races, zip code? So many funders are very place-based and looking to increase outcomes for people in specific geographic regions. Can you communicate that? Can you be very specific that the target audience that you desire to serve is actually who you serve? And then we'll talk a lot more about outcomes, but you want to then identify your short-term outcomes and your intermediate term outcomes. And your short-term outcomes are those things that happen immediately after someone engages with your services. And when I say immediately, I mean, if you have a 30-minute information and referral session, it's what happens after that 30 minutes. If you have a 6-week intervention, it's what happens to someone during that 6 weeks. And if you have a year-long program, it's what happens during that year-long program. So it's not necessarily time-based, it's intervention-based. So what happens immediately after someone engages in your programming, that's typically things like a change in attitude, change in knowledge, change of skill. And then your intermediate outcomes is what do they do with that? And that's often more behavioral based. What new behaviors are they seeing, or what behaviors will they stop doing? What is it? Is it a financial change, whether it's, a change in income or a change in employment status? Those are often the medium-term outcomes that your nonprofit should be tracking. And so as a high-performing, data-driven nonprofit, you should be using and collecting data related to short and medium-term outcomes. So let's kind of level set. When I'm talking about these different pieces of a logic model, let's bring them into your understanding and something outside of the nonprofit sector. So let's just use this example of hamburgers, right? So the inputs of a hamburger are those ingredients that you put together. The activities you do would be cooking the meat, assembling the hamburger. The outputs are the numbers of hamburgers that you have served, or you've created. And the impact, though, then is that people are fed, or that they're satisfied, the quality, the healthiness of that. Did my screen stop sharing? No? Okay, great. And so that is that's kind of the difference between outputs and outcomes. Is outputs is just a count. It does not tell me if you made a good hamburger or a bad hamburger, if people liked your hamburger, if they got fed because they ate that hamburger. All it tells me is how many hamburgers you produce. Where outcomes is that quality, that change in life, that change in circumstance that those hamburgers brought about, or in your case, your programs and your services brought about. So we want to stop just counting hamburgers, and we want to start measuring what I think is the true profit of nonprofits, and that is their outcomes and impact. And so you can take me for my word, or we'll show you some examples of what funders are asking for more and more now. So this is the Madison Community Foundation. You can see in their proposal format, number 4, it says proposed outcomes and outcome indicators. And let's drill down even further on what they're asking their nonprofits to provide.
So let you know, the slide didn't change on our end.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're still on the hamburger slide.
Oh, I have this little thing that says it's been paused. Don't know why.
You want to try unsharing and resharing your screen really quick?
Yeah.
Here we go. I know folks love the hamburger slide, so it's okay that we got to look at that a little bit longer.
Did that work?
There we go. Yep.
Great. I'm just a little bit ahead now. There we go. So here was my Madison Community Foundation slide. Thanks for letting me know it in advance. And you can see this is actually their proposal format that they're asking for. And they're giving you 5 pages, but number 4, 2 paragraphs long, they're talking about that you need to talk about your proposed outcomes and outcome indicators. Now, let's drill down deeper. What are they saying? They're asking you to identify up to 3 outcomes for your project and specify the measurable income indicators you will use to determine whether that outcome has been achieved. And they specifically say in here how they define outcomes. And it's showing you that you need a target number and a percentage that you'll change, improve skills, knowledge, abilities, behavior, etc. And so this is what funders, whether they say it explicitly or they want to see it, are wanting to see from you as an applicant. So that's just an example of like what you'll need to be communicating to funders. And what you also want to be communicating to funders is not just that, oh, we planned to measure these. You'll be even more successful if you don't just say, we plan to measure this if we get the grant. You will be more successful if you can communicate, we do measure this now with the programming that we already are offering, and that we continue to monitor this information to learn new things and to improve. Right. So you're constantly using this data to innovate, and you're using the data that you already have collected in your case for support, in your justification for why they should give you a grant, because you're talking about what we're trying to accomplish. This is what our nonprofit mission is. This is how we measure success. This is how we know if we've seen changes in our communities. And this is the same data that not only do we use to show you that we do what we say we do, but we also use it to make improvements. And so a funder, sometimes people are scared of data, and they're afraid that they'll learn that they're not as good as they think they are. And I talk about this in my presentations because I want everyone to recognize that that is normal, that if you feel that way, that is okay. But let's change our mindset a bit around that, because what the funder, it's not that they want you to collect data to say, haha, I got you, I'm going to stop funding you, you're not a great nonprofit. It's actually the opposite. It's freeing. It's this ability to be able to say, we've been tracking our outcomes and we learned that this particular intervention is not as effective as we want it to be. And now we know why. So now we're coming to you, funder, asking for additional funds so that we can pivot and change and increase our effectiveness. That is a very powerful story. Funders want to be involved with data-driven, innovative, thoughtful nonprofits. And the only way you can do that is if you can show that this is an ongoing process, not something that just lives in the grant world or just you do it once a year when all of a sudden you have a grant application due. So high performing nonprofits that are using data and winning grants at a much greater rate, they are prioritizing data entry. Oftentimes people want great dashboards and they want outcomes, but if they don't prioritize the ongoing data collection, then they do not have this information when it's time to write a grant. So we have to remember that it does require, I always say, high performing data-driven grant applications. Impact measurement and impact storytelling is a team effort. It is not a solo effort. And we need to get our whole team involved with understanding the importance of why we need to continue to collect, analyze, and use our data. And what we're going to do with that, and that's what Sheri Impact is all about. Sheri Impact is an online platform that allows nonprofits to constantly be tracking what they do, how well they do it, and how people are better off, and having that information at their fingertips, not just at the grant writer's fingertips, but at the entire organization's fingertips. So if I'm an individual contributor, I log in and I get to see how my efforts are moving the needle. My managers can see our whole team's effort in moving the needle. And that's how we reinforce this data-driven culture, because everyone is seeing that feedback loop. Everyone is seeing how well we're doing as an organization, and it allows us to have continuous data-driven, data-focused conversations. And so if you and your nonprofit are struggling, if you're the grant writer and you're like, I would love this information, but I can't get my team or my program department on board to collect this data, really need to come together and think about how can we create a more data-driven culture where everyone is involved in the data collection, use, and analysis of the information. And Sheri Impact helps nonprofits do that. So let's give you some more real examples of real foundations. So the Community Foundation of Texas, they're very, very clear about what they're looking for. Their goals are to increase economic mobility, including financial security, increased credit scores, long-term improvements in financial capabilities. And so if this was if you were going to apply to this foundation, you would want to be able to communicate this information to those foundations. And this foundation is sophisticated that they then also roll that data up so they can tell a collective impact story for their whole entire portfolio of grants. And so they're able to talk about how clients who have multiple services have better outcomes than those who just receive one. They're able to talk about how the household income has changed, how clients have saved more money, and what the difference is between those that when they received services before when they didn't. And this is what we're talking about when we're talking about an impact story, is having this level of data points and analysis and to tell your story. This is what funders are looking for. This is what they want to fund. And they're now even moving towards more collective impact, where they're able to roll that up and look at their whole entire portfolio of grants so they can tell their impact story to go raise more money for their fund or their foundation. All right, so how are we going to do this? What are the ingredients we need for a strong and compelling impact statement? So first and foremost, yes, you do need to know the number of clients you served, but we don't want to stop there. We need to make sure that we can talk about who they are. So we want some data related to our client demographics. We also want to talk about what did we do. So if you think about that example I just showed you before, they knew that if you had more than one service, you were actually more successful than just one service. So you need to be able to link client demographics with services, with the quality and outcomes data that you're collecting, and be able to put all four of these ingredients together in order to tell a very strong impact statement. So thinking about your own nonprofit, I want you to reflect on, could you easily and quickly have all of this information at your fingertips where you could quickly look at, do you have equitable outcomes for different client demographics? Do you know the relationship between what you do and how people in communities are better off? And if people are enrolled in multiple programs of yours, do they have better outcomes than those who don't? That is the type of information that your nonprofit should be collecting and using and communicating for optimal success. So here's some other examples of some strong impact statements. So these are real impact statements that SureImpact users are collecting through our platform. But being able to, for example, a mental health and recovery organization is able to talk about how 82% of their clients have reported better understanding of addiction and recovery services offered in the community. They've achieved better treatment outcomes, and they've reported reduced barriers to accessing services. Or an affordable housing provider is able to talk about how the percentage of participants were able to increase or maintain safe and affordable housing, achieve positive income stability, as well as being able to increase their hope for the future. And so these are the types of statements that funders are looking for. And they're not just looking for, yes, we'll talk a minute about stories. They have a really strong point too, but it's this data with stories that's going to inspire and drive organizations to fund you, or nonprofit, other founders, grant makers to fund you. All right, so here's some really inspiring real life case studies of SureImpact users and how they've taken the insights they have through SureImpact to make a huge difference, not only in their communities, but in their organizations as well. So Pathlight Home is an affordable housing provider in Orlando, Florida. And when they started working with us, they really only knew the number of residents they saw. They knew demographics of residents, and they knew if they left the supported housing or not, but they didn't know much about outcomes of different things. And so they started to collect this information, and they started to link between outcomes and services received. And they were able to understand that those who received case management services were 2.5 times more likely to have a successful, either not a successful move out or continue to stay, versus those who did not receive case management. And as you all know, it being part of nonprofits, some, depending on funding sources, some clients were eligible for case management, others were not. And so what Pathlight Home did is they now had this particular information. They were able to go fundraise, tell other funders that, hey, some of our residents don't qualify for case management services through our government funds, but look at this information. Would you fund case management services? And they were able to fully fund their case management services through grants. And also, since starting to collect this data and use it and tell their story, they have now expanded. They've taken over some other nonprofit organizations, and they were able to do that because the funders trusted that they were data driven, they had proven outcomes, and that they were making a difference in their community. And this is more data that they were looking at. And so they have this kind of holistic view of what's going on in their for their residents. Not just are they staying housed or not staying housed, but they can look at by different programs. So for example, they learned that eviction rates in one of their programs was a little higher than other programs. And so they can dive in deeper to figure out what's going on in that particular program and where do we need to provide supports. Or they're looking at, we might have a really great retention in our increased job skills for those in our social enterprise, their Pathlight Kitchen for them is a social enterprise, but only 46% of residents were able to improve their family relationships. And so if we know that increased social support and family relationships is important for our residents to have a thriving life, maybe we need to look into this area a little more to see what we can do to improve. And so, this is great information to share with a funder, but it's also great information for your nonprofit to be data driven, to make improvements, understand what you should be raising money for, and telling your funder why it's needed. Also want to share a great case study of Lori Leigh Bellhumer in Anaheim, California, Western Youth Services. And they are a youth-serving mental health organization. Since being able to measure and communicate their impact and have these types of insights at their fingertips, they have basically taken their school-based program in just a few schools to now every school throughout Anaheim. And during the pandemic, they received millions of dollars from a funder, because the funder knew they had a long-lasting track record for delivering youth services to youth that were making a difference. And therefore, when a lot of money came flowing into communities, Western Youth Services received those funds over other nonprofits in the community because they had that trust, they had that proven track record. The funder knew that they would be using data to evaluate the impact of those services. Another case study to share is Centers of Hope. They're a nonprofit based in Toledo, Ohio, also a Sure Impact user. They shared on a webinar we did recently with Grant Station that having this type of data, sorry, I keep moving it, having this type of data has led them to increase their revenues by about 42% in 1 year. And partially because they were able to calculate their social return on investment. They knew what their success rate was for the families that they serve, and then they were able to basically estimate how much they were saving the community and what social return on investment they were delivering to that community. And that inspired funders to fund them and give them more money because they could talk about their cost per success. Again, it's these types of stories that are driving funders to fund these organizations. And I've been kind of running through these case studies quickly because I want to make sure I have time for your questions. But I know grant writers, you're writers. You absolutely love to write. You have been trained, rightfully so, to tell stories. And so I do not think that in any way, shape, or form, I am saying that a good story, a good writing, great images, great pictures are not part of what is the ingredients to telling your impact. They absolutely are. But this information comes from Made to Stick, Dan and Chip Heath's book. You might have read it before. And this is why we need both stories and data and facts, because we can use our own data to share unexpected outcomes. So a lot of the work that you do every single day within your nonprofits is not known to the wider community. And so your own data can get people to pay attention. So if you know, for example, that, we've worked with some organizations that were able to show that kids in certain zip codes were performing significantly less in math than their peers in other zip codes. If you can share that and that was unknown, that might get people to pay attention. So you're giving them those unexpected results and getting people to pay attention. You also, when you can communicate how you're quantifying and measuring data, it's concrete facts. It's something that those funders can rationalize why they want to give to you. They can justify their decisions and say, well, it's because they have the facts, they have the data, they are credible. They're using this information. They're not just telling me a story. They're just not telling me something that feels good. Yes, they are doing that, and it's credible. There's information, there's research behind that. But the stories are important too, because it helps you remember, a story is going to help them remember you. It's going to help you stand out. It's also going to bring out the emotion of the nonprofits that you serve. So you want to present the data in a way that mixes both. It tells a great story as well as then presents those concrete facts. And when you're writing a grant, of course, you want to celebrate your successes, but don't be afraid to use that data that you've learned. It may not be as great, and you're using that as the justification and the motivation for why you are asking for this funding. So that leads me to the Q&A portion, as well as Deanna and I have some great freebies for you here in a minute. But I do want to pause before we let you know about those. If you do have any questions, I don't know if any questions have come up in the chat yet. I'd love to hear them.
Yeah, Sheri, if we want to quickly go over this slide and the freebies, then I have a list of questions that I can read out for you that we can start with.
Great.
Does that sound good?
That sounds great. So we'll tell you about the freebies and then I'll answer the question. So Sure Impact will be offering our ultimate guide to impact measurement. So I know we only had a hour, and there is a lot to unpack in this webinar, as you probably saw. So if you go to the link, or maybe we'll drop the link in the chat, you can get access to our guide. It outlines everything I shared today and much more in terms of what are good outcome measures, how do you collect the data, how do you use the data, how do you analyze the data, really a step-by-step guide to helping you create those impact stories.
Awesome. And then we're also giving away the 10 best lessons from 10 grant writing experts, which is like a 40-page guide of some really awesome content. So I dropped the link in the chat. All you have to do is fill it out. It should take less than a minute, and then you will get access to those really awesome freebies. Before we jump into the Q&A, just a couple links I want to share on my end. If you enjoyed today's presentation, which has been incredible so far, we have more partner webinars coming up in June. Next week, we have on June 14th, how to become an expert federal grant RFP reviewer with Rachel Werner. So if you want to check that out, I'm just going to drop a link to our upcoming grant workshops, our calendar in the chat, so you can easily register for more if you're interested. And then last but not least, just in case folks missed it, I'm going to drop the link to create a free trial in the chat. This is completely non-binding, like you don't have to enter any credit card information. Like it really is just an awesome opportunity to create an Instrumentl account, like see what it's all about. And then if you want to continue, you can. And if you don't, like it's again, non-binding, but really just encourage everyone to check out Instrumentl and see what we got going on in there. So I'll drop that in the chat one more time. And with that, let's open things up to questions. We got a bunch of really awesome questions in the chat throughout the presentation. So I'm just going to go in like chronological order from when I got those. But first, I just want to say, because I've seen this a couple times, the recording and the slides will be sent out afterwards. So fear not, you'll get access to that after either today or tomorrow. So with that, our first question is from Susan. And I think this could apply to a lot of other folks as well. How can a small nonprofit gather and interpret data when there are only 2 staff members and we're already stretched to our limits? Sheri.
Yeah, so I think that's where it's creating and prioritizing data as part of your offering. So making sure that when you think about how you're interacting with people every single day, that the data collection is just part of that routine. So once you identify what are those outcomes that you're expecting to see, either in the individuals you serve or the community, that you think about, okay, how am I going to just on a day-to-day basis? And that's where, you know, a tool like Share Impact really does help you systematize, analyze, and have that information at your fingertips. But that, you know, even if you're at a place where all you can use right now is a free or a tool we already have access to, like Google or Excel, is just doing it every single day makes it a lot less overwhelming than if you feel like you've got to, you know, do some big data collection once a year.
Awesome. And then next question from Miranda. What are some strategies for measuring impact if the population served is extremely transient? Sheri.
Yeah, so that's where I think we often as nonprofits, we get ourselves in a little bit of trouble because we think of things like that we have to measure long-term outcomes. What you need to do is think about your intervention and what happens immediately after that intervention. So if you you do see a very transient population, but that you do have access to them during the time in which you're engaged with them, you want to be measuring the outcomes that happens while they're engaged with you. And you can try for medium and long-term outcomes to use things like I think social media is a really great way to see if that's a way you can continue to stay engaged with transient populations, because most people change their address, they change their cell phone number, but they often do not change their social media handle. So it's if you can think about ways to use social media groups to stay engaged with your participants, that's often a really successful way to keep kind of follow up with a transient population.
Awesome. And just quickly want to address a couple of messages I see in the chat. If you're having issues accessing the download from the form, just encourage you to try filling that out again and see if you get that email to your inbox. And if it doesn't work, you have access. Here's my email. And then Sheri, if you want to go back to that last slide with your follow-up email and information, folks can reach out to us directly if you're having any issues as well. With that, let me move forward with our other questions. Question from Jackie. How do you provide the impact of your organization when you have several programs, but there's one that has all the data needed, but the other minor programs are a lot weaker on data?
Well, I think you start with what you have. So you can share the outcomes for that particular program that you have access to. And then I would encourage you to actually use that one program as an example for the others in your nonprofit. And maybe that's a big program, so they have a lot of data, but then put that logic model that I talked about. You want to do a organization-wide logic model, not just program logic models. And I know that's often most people think about in silos and programs, but if you start with an organization-wide logic model, what you'll often find is that you have common outcomes across all programs. And so then you start to collect data for all programs in similar ways so that you can aggregate and roll up your entire organization story, not just thinking about things in programmatic ways.
Awesome. Great info there. A couple more questions, and then if folks have any questions that have not been addressed, feel free to pop them in the chat and I'll add them to this list. But we have a question from Kendall. How do you measure the data for social impact? We run programs that are based on socialization and building confidence. It is at a library, so there are no costs and no registrations associated, so we don't collect direct information about the participants besides the number of attendees.
So I guess I would ask you, why wouldn't you at least be able to have a survey or some information right there while you're engaging with people? Again, it's a short-term information, but even if you don't want to capture registration data or information like that, having some sort of questionnaire or assessment right there on the spot when you're interacting with someone about the impact or the difference that particular individual has experienced because of your services is a great way to just start to capture some data if you don't want to track registrations and other information about who you serve. It's just kind of a quick, short survey or assessment, asking people some questions so you can start to at least get that feedback for the work that you're doing.
Awesome. And then new developments on the issues that folks are having. It looks like Anna said that if you sign up to get the newsletter and after that, you're able to get the freebies via email. So try that out. And then if it still doesn't work, let us know and we'll make sure to follow up after. Okay, question from Dan. Much of the effectiveness of programs cannot be captured with quantitative metrics. How does Sheri Impact handle qualitative data? And do you have any best practices for effectively using that kind of information?
Yeah, so I'm an industrial and organizational psychologist by training. I should have led with that. And so when we're talking about the difference between quantitative and qualitative data, depending on what people are thinking about, we may have a slightly different answer to this question. But there are many things that often people think is qualitative and it can't be quantified, but Sheri Impact actually has embedded into our platform best practice tools and assessments that basically take what a lot of people think like social emotional learning or increased confidence or change in attitude and behavior. We have best practice measures in our system that help you at least systematically measure that particular information. And so depending on like where this question's coming from, surveys is a totally appropriate way to as long as you're systematically asking questions in a way that have psychometric properties, it's appropriate way to measure the impact of nonprofit services. Just a fun note that if you think about what most of government funding goes to fund and decisions that are made, they're made based on what? They are made on census data. And what is census data? It is a giant survey. And so I guess I just ask that you think about, are you using their surveys in a systematic, strategic way so that you have a standardized way to look at changes over time and success over time?
Awesome. It looks like we have time for maybe one more question before we wrap things up. So last question for you, Sheri, from Arnold. How does the Plan, Do, Study Act relate to the outputs and outcomes?
Sure. So the Plan, Do, Study Act is for you to, plan your intervention. And as part of that, you're going to create what are your output measures and what are your outcome measures that you're going to collect while you implement this new intervention. And you're using that data basically to give you feedback on, is this intervention working? Do we need to add things? Do we need to take away things? Do we need to improve it? So you're using this data-driven approach to innovation and program design and program implementation.
Awesome. And just to wrap up the situation in the chat box about the resource, looks like the link to the guides page on Sure Impact's website was shared, so you can download it from there. Also, Sheri's contact info is here. If you have any further issues, please reach out. And so sorry for the inconvenience there. Sounds like there's just might be something broken on the back end. So apologize for that. But we are right at time. So before we let everyone go, just want to take a quick moment to say a huge thank you to Sheri for sharing today and sharing all of your knowledge. I also want to share and thank everyone in the chat and the audience for tuning in today and just being like super engaged and asking very thoughtful questions. We always really appreciate that. We hope everyone enjoyed today's webinar, and we really hope to see you at another one soon. Any last words from you, Sheri?
No, just thank you so much. And I always encourage everyone to keep measuring and achieving excellence.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Have a great Wednesday.
Bye.